Good morning, my name is Shirley McKay and today I'm here with Mrs Frances Orford, who was the original founder of Multicultural Day, which we know as our Yeronga Celebrates. So welcome back to Yeronga in 2025.
Thank you very much.
So Mrs Orford, could you please tell us how the idea for the original Multicultural Day at Yeronga came about?
Yes, of course. Look, we have to go back about 30 years or more. In those days, what you now know as EALD, we called the ESL department. And I became a teacher in that department, and it was totally separate from the school. We weren't involved in many things at the school. The students went out into some classes, but there was a strong sense of separation. And that bothered me a bit because I think things are healthier if everyone joins in together. We're also looking at the context of 9/11 and the Twin Towers being bombed, and a growth in worldwide suspicion and mistrust of anyone they didn't see like themselves. Now, into this situation, Yeronga increasingly was welcoming into the ESL department more and more refugees. There were many young people who came from Africa. They were the largest contingent, but also a lot of teenage boys who came from Afghanistan. If they hadn't come, they'd have been killed by the Taliban. So things were difficult. And the reason why I wanted to start a multicultural day is because I felt things needed to change. There needed to be benefits to the ESL, EALD student population, many of whom were very traumatized, many of whom had had major education gaps, but there also needed to be a big change within the school. The staff didn't really understand what most of these young people had gone through, and because they were dealing with so many things that were different, they found it very challenging. And so I came up with the idea of a multicultural day as maybe shifting a number of those things.
So what was your vision for Multicultural Day when you first organised it, and how did the school community respond?
My vision was to have significant change happen within the school. And of course, I had a number of ideas for that. I'd been away from the school as Education Queensland's Senior Cultural Policy Officer, and that made me rethink that things could change, and it made me rethink about how important not just understanding cultural diversity is, but also doing things to make sure that it's welcomed and it's embraced. And they're all different stages in the same thing. Now, one of the strategies that I used, but it was a very important one to me, was to go to the new principal as he was then and say, my vision is to have lots of changes in the school. And one of those changes was to have a multicultural day. The reason behind that was that I felt a lot of the ESL population, as I knew it, were almost invisible. I don't mean walking around the school, but in terms of how they felt, how they fitted in, what they'd been going through. And because many of them had had huge trauma in their lives, they needed to not only be thought about, they needed to be embraced. So it was a twofold thing, to have something visual like a multicultural day that was also highly visible, include the whole school population in it, so as I hoped the reaction would be from the Australian kids and from the staff. Oh wow, these kids have got a lot to contribute. I'd never thought about this before. And from the refugee kids, I wanted them to feel, because many of them were in probably a fairly low and in some case depressed state, this place is good, this place does recognise me and welcome me, and to feel a real pride, because for many of them they'd almost hidden their cultural identities, and that's not a healthy thing, and that's not what I wanted. So my vision was to make them visible and to make sure that the school would then start to embrace what they were seeing.
Yeah.
So the second part of what you asked me was about how the community, the school community, responded. In those days, collection of school data was quite a new thing.
Yeah.
But a few months after Multicultural Day, the staff were all asked to respond to a survey.
Yeah.
And one of the questions is, what did you feel about Multicultural Day? And I was blown away because the answer was 100% support for it.
So good.
And that just was amazing. I mean, on the day, I was rushing around because I'd essentially organised it on my own.
Yeah.
But all the time people were saying, this is fantastic. And do you know they're doing henna there and they're hair braiding there and capoeira? Do you know there's the World Cup soccer going on down on the Oval? Oh, and the Parade of Nations. 60 cultures in this school I hadn't. Those were the sorts of responses I was getting.
Yeah.
And so it was brilliant.
How does it feel to see the event still going strong today as Yeronga celebrates?
It gives me a huge sense of pride.
Yeah.
I always wanted it to last. It could never be a one-off,
Yeah.
because to do a one-off, the memory fades, the impact of it goes away. And so I wanted it, part of my vision was that this would be something that will become a regular feature of the school. I love the idea that it's now called Yeronga Celebrates,
Yeah.
because it was always a celebration of how unique Yeronga is. And it really is, and that's a big part of what the whole Yeronga community is. I don't know of any other school that has the cultural diversity of Yeronga. I don't know of any other school that is so inclusive. I don't know any other school where kids from many different cultures don't feel uncomfortable. They feel they're part of this community. So I think the word celebrates now is perfect. Multicultural, the idea of multicultural has become a bit historical now.
Yeah.
It's no longer contemporary anyway. And I just think that the whole, the continuity of it, and I also think I wanted it to be a whole day. When I first decided on this, when I returned to the school in 2004 and began the first Multicultural Day in 2005. Because if you just have it for an hour or two, it's too brief. I wanted it to be a big effort, a big commitment, because when people have to commit to something and all the staff have to be involved, that's when it has a more thoroughgoing effect. So we would always start with workshops. We'd have sporting events, we'd have the Parade of Nation with everybody showing from Afghanistan and Australia right through to the other end of the alphabet. We'd have the costumes, we'd have all of the different ethnic foods. Australian kids also got into it. They'd all come in their Aussie flags. Teachers got into it. And then, of course, there was a concert. And the concert, the kids were delighted to get up on stage and dance and do their stuff and sing. And I think essentially most of those elements are still retained now. So over 20 years, I'm really thrilled that the original idea is still there.
Why do you think celebrating cultural diversity at school is so important for students, families, and a wider community?
It's important for everyone, and I'm glad that you put the three elements in that question. I've already mentioned how important it was for the EALD students to feel included. It was also very important for them to feel proud of who they were, not trying to hide what they had been or where they had come from, but to feel confident in that and proud of that and not feeling uncomfortable around other students. It was so important for, and still is, for Australian-born students to also see the diversity from which so many of their fellow students, where they come from. It's important for the school as a whole, from the cleaners to the ancillary staff to the teachers, the whole school staff, to really know they can't be in a school like this and not have a good understanding for cultural diversity. And it has to be foregrounded. Once you stop doing that, then the school might be in danger of losing something of all of the things that it's learnt historically, of all the things that it now values. So it's very important. And of course, for the community, what I started to do 20 years ago was ask along community agencies, politicians, people from Education Queensland, and all sorts of other people, especially families. And for families of recently arrived young people, they didn't feel comfortable or confident coming into the school. And I wanted them to say, come and see, this is your culture and your dress and your food being shown here. So it's a broad effect, really. And cultural diversity in Australia has to continue to grow, and people have to increasingly and retain empathy for people who've come from other cultures and be impressed by it, because it grows us all.
And of course, if you didn't already know, this is Mr. Ben Orford's mum. Now, how do you feel about him leading Yeronga State High School and continuing the legacy of everything, basically?
I absolutely love it. I was here for 22 years with only a very short break. I used to, 30 years ago, come home from Yeronga. We live on the north side of Brisbane. I would pick Ben, Mr. Orford, up from school, and probably on the way home to our house from his school. And when we got home over dinner, I'd very often, probably more often than the kids would have liked, I used to talk about Yeronga. And I used to talk about lots of the things that the ESL, EALD kids were experiencing. I used to communicate my empathy for them, how strongly I felt about their situations, their need, what was happening in their lives. And in due course, my children, including Ben, met quite a lot of different students from here, because I would bring them along or talk about them so much at home. And so I think from then, they were left in no doubt that I absolutely loved this place and that I had a deep passion for it. And I found it at times really consuming, because everything about it and everything that could be achieved here was so important to me. And so when Ben said Mr. Orford said he was applying to become principal here, what did I think? I don't know. I probably clapped my hands and said, go for it, and I hope you get it. And now that he's permanently here, I'm just thrilled. Of course, it's another means of communication for us. I still feel a part of this culture, a part of this school's history. And I think the legacy that I've given to Ben, and he's taken on as his own and will grow it and develop it differently from some of mine, is to want to understand, is to want to embrace diversity, is to have a strong sense of empathy and support for, of course, not just EALD students, but I think if you're empathetic you're empathetic across the board. And I think in having that, he's learnt a lot from his mum, but that's who he is as well. So I think, and he's early days here, and I think the longer you're here, the more you understand the school. But he will say to me this weekend, as school resumed, I said, we've got to go back for the new term. And he said, I love it, Mum. I'm so happy at Yeronga.
Yeronga Celebrates! We look forward to celebrate this very special occasion with you guys on Friday the 15th of August.